Thank you very much. I will share my presentation with you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here and to discuss this important topic with you. Like I already indicated, I'm a professor of environmental psychology. So we study the relationship between people and the environment. And today I will focus on what motivates people to act on climate change, to help mitigate climate change. Well, first, to set the stage, why should we consider looking at psychology to address this issue? Climate change is to a large extent caused by human behavior. That's why we speak of anthropogenic climate change. And that's clearly shown in the figure. This is from one of the IPCC reports, the fourth assessment report. You can clearly see that the emissions of greenhouse gases increased rapidly when the industrialization became a fact. And that means that a lot of these emissions can be attributed to the choices we make, the way we act on a daily basis, the products that we use and the behavior that we engage in. So before I go ahead, I would first like to ask you two questions. And I will provide you with the answers, and the answers are from a big European survey, the European Social Survey, in many different, over 20 different European countries. And the questionnaire included two questions that I would like you to reflect upon. The first question was, do you think climate change is happening? So do people believe in the reality of climate change? So think briefly about what percentage of these Europeans you think denies that climate change is happening. Yeah, so what percentage does think it's not happening? The second question, follow-up question, what percentage of these European respondents think it has nothing to do with our behavior? It's a natural phenomenon. So what percentage do you think it's not anthropogenic? Yeah, well, I ask this question oftentimes for audiences, and mostly people come up with quite high percentages. Not sure what you were thinking, but it starts from 20 till even 60% or so that people deny climate change or think it has nothing to do with human action. I'll show you the outcomes. This is about, do you think the world's climate is changing? And what you see, that's a very, very small minority, 2% actually, that firmly believes climate change is not happening. Probably not changing, still a very small percentages. So many people believe climate change is happening. Also, many people believe it has to do something, at least, with human behavior. Like you say, only for those see in this picture, of those who believe in climate change, only 2% thinks it's entirely a natural phenomenon. So it's not an issue that people do not believe climate change is happening or that they don't believe that it has to do with our behavior. It's also not because they think it will have negative consequences, but it is about translating these beliefs into action. And that is what I will focus on today. And if you think about addressing climate change, well, one thing that you learn if you are involved in climate debates and in IPCC processes, you know it's not an easy fix. If we would like to mitigate climate change, to limit climate change to 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees, we need to engage in many different behaviors. And many different behaviors can contribute to helping mitigating climate change. So there's choices as well. So here you see some pictures of all the actions we could engage in. We could transport ourselves in a more sustainable way, fly less. Well, that's actually now happening in a corona crisis. Use public transport more, not happening because at least in the Netherlands, we are advised not to use public transport at this stage. Cycle more instead of driving, but also use renewable energy sources, insulate your home, drive an electric vehicle instead of fossil fuel-driven cars, recycle more, consume different products, change your diet, mostly less animal products would help, but also protesting, to urge policymakers to make different choices, to implement different policies, like you see now happening with the climate marches, of voting in favor of parties that will mitigate climate change, that will implement changes to mitigate climate change, would all help to address climate change. And since these wide area of actions are needed, we are particularly looking at more general factors that motivate people to act on climate change over and again in many different situations, today, tomorrow, and next year as well. And one of the factors that we consider in this respect are values. And we define values as general goals that people strive for in their life. So it is what you generally deem important to strive for. Not on a daily basis if you're in the supermarket, what product you choose, but more general, what do you think is most important to strive for? Four of these values are particularly relevant to understand sustainable behavior, climate action. 2 of these make people focus on their own interest. That's first hedonic values, top left, and that means that people strive for pleasure in their life. They want to reduce effort. Egoistic values imply that people try to enhance their resources, save money, for example, enhance your status. And what you oftentimes see, that acting on climate change is not helping you to achieve these 2 types of values. So acting pro-environmentally, sustainably on climate change is oftentimes somewhat less pleasurable and also rather costly. If you need to insulate your home, well, you need to invest quite some money now. Many people like driving more than cycling. This is of course not always the case. There's also many actions that would also be beneficial for these values, like cycling on a sunny day. At least I would enjoy that very much. And saving energy in your home would save you money as well, right? Because your electricity bill will be lower. 2 other types of values make people focus on their collective interest, the interest of others or the environment more broadly. First, altruistic values. That means that people want to have other people have a pleasurable life, a good life. So you want to benefit others, close others like your family, but also distant others like people in the developing world. And biospheric values, the last one, imply that people aim to protect the environment and nature as such. So not only because it is beneficial for yourself as well, but because they care about the environment. And what we find is that people who endorse strong altruistic values and who strongly endorse biospheric values, especially the latter, the more people care about these values, the more likely they are to act on climate change, because doing so would benefit other people in other countries, future generations, and it would benefit nature and the environment. Fortunately, many people do quite strongly endorse these values. I will come back to this in a minute. So sometimes it has been argued like, yeah, this is nice, but who is able to care about the environment? That's only the well-off, because people in the developing world cannot afford to care about the environment because they need to put all the effort into daily survival. Now, that's not what we found. So we did quite some studies in different countries, and here you see a selection of pictures reflecting the countries where these types of studies have been done. And in all these countries, we see that these values can be distinguished, but also the more strongly people endorse biospheric values, the more likely they are to act pro-environmentally in many different situations. So not only in the Netherlands, Belgium, also in Norway or in Budapest, Eastern Europe, Russia. My colleague in Russia was skeptical. He said in the post-socialist country like Russia, people are very strong focused on hedonic values. They don't care about the environment. That's not what we found. They care about the environment. The more they do so, the more likely they are to act pro-environmentally. Lithuania, you see it, Japan, but also in the USA, in Argentina, Iran, and Mexico, and some African countries you see, Ethiopia and Kenya. One of my students did a study in Mexico. She even found that the poorer people more strongly endorse biospheric values than the rich people. So across the world, people do care about the environment. The more they do so, the more likely they act pro-environmentally. It might be for different reasons, by the way. Maybe people in developing countries might care about the environment because they rely on the resources from nature, right? That is something that we still need to look into details, what is happening there. So let's now move to what does this all imply for promoting sustainable behavior? So what are relevant strategies, or let's not say relevant, dominant, prominent strategies employed by governments all over the world? Well, first strategy is information. And the idea here is if people would only know, they would do the right thing, they would act pro-environmentally. Second strategy, targeting extrinsic motivation. Make acting upon climate change attractive, beneficial, and people will do it. So add some extra consequences to it, and people will discover that this is good for them personally and engage in the behavior. I will go into each of these in a minute, and then I will tell something about why it would also be important to consider intrinsic motivation, which means that people act pro-environmentally because they want to do so themselves, even though it might be somewhat costly or effortful, because they care about protecting the environment. So then the motivation comes from within, and people are willing to bear some cost to make it happen. Now, let's first go to information. These are just some examples of campaigns that you can find on the internet or wherever. You probably know many other examples yourself. Informing people about a problem, informing people what they can do to mitigate these problems. Across the board, what many meta-analysis and review papers have shown is that information is important, but oftentimes not sufficient to change behavior. What mostly happens is that people become aware of the problem, they become aware of the options that they have, but it does not translate into behavior change. How come? I will give you a few reasons. Well, first of all, this is not the only information people get. They also get information from other sources. Climate skeptics, there is a small group like I showed, but very loud and outspoken on social media, but also on the regular media, telling us, oh, we don't need to be concerned. So people get also different messages, which might overrule the messages that organizations like the ones that you're working for are communicating. The other reason is the following, and I'll show you a movie to demonstrate what I mean.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
But I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you? Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
But I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Well, this movie nicely illustrates what I mean. So depending on the values that you strongly endorse, the ones that I introduced earlier, you focus on particular aspects of the situation, and those aspects are quite strongly affecting the choices that you make. And other consequences, aspects that are also present, might be overlooked or at least not considered that strongly. So let me give you an example of how this works in practice. This is a study that we did in the Netherlands among a general population sample. We showed people two movies. One half of the group was shown a documentary, it was, on the negative consequences of bottled water. So they learned bottled water is bad for the environment, not only because of the plastics, but also because these bottles are transported all over the world. So we drink Australian water and the Australians drink Dutch water almost, right? So it has a major environmental impact. The other half of the sample saw an unrelated movie. After that, we asked them about their knowledge to see whether they listened carefully, understood the information, their awareness of the consequences, and we asked them whether they would support policies to reduce bottled water use and whether they would intend to use bottled water less. So not to purchase the bottle anymore, but drink tap water instead. What we found is overall, if you look at the full sample, people were more knowledgeable, they were more aware of the problems, but they had no stronger intentions nor supported policy more if they saw the documentary on bottled water versus the control movie. Nicely replicating what I said before, information provision changes knowledge and awareness, but does not translate in behavior, does not even translate in intentions in this case. Then we zoomed into what happens if you consider values. And we found that for people with weak biospheric values who do not care about the environment that much, they did not change their intentions or their policy support. So no difference between them and the control group. But when people strongly endorse biospheric values, they were not only more aware of the problems, but they also indicated that they would reduce less bottled water in the future, and they would more strongly support policy that aimed to ban the use of bottled water. So what this implies is that this information particularly motivates the already motivated people. That might be quite important if they don't know about these consequences yet, but chances are that you're preaching before the choir, right? That you tell people you've convinced those who were already convinced and who already did this. Let's move to the next strategy. Targeting extrinsic motivation, adding additional benefits to make sure that acting pro-environmentally is also beneficial for yourself. This can work pretty well. So let me show you this on the basis of an example of a study that we did. What happened here is that in collaboration with insurance companies, we conducted a study in which we tried to encourage young drivers to reduce the level of speeding, so to speed less. And if they would do so, they could receive money. They could in total earn something like 20, 25 euros a month if they would not follow the speed limit carefully. So every time they speeded, they would earn less money. And we monitored that behavior with GPS installed in their car. So 20 euros is quite a substantial amount of money, especially for young drivers who normally pay a high insurance premium. So what we did, we installed the GPS devices in the car, waited for some time because we wanted to have a pre-measure. Then 2 periods long, people were rewarded if they acted appropriately. And not speeding, by the way, is of course good for the environment, right? Because if you speed less, you use less gasoline, so you emit less CO2. So 2 intervention periods, quite a long time, and then a post measure in which the GPS was still in the car, but people were not incentivized anymore. The dotted line, no, sorry, let's start with the straight line. The straight line is a control group. They received some money at the end of the trial, of the experiment, irrespective of what they did, how they behaved. They were not aware of being part of an experiment. And what you see is that the control group speeded more speeded more in the initial phase, reduced the speeding in the experimental stages, and then increased speeding again at the end, at a higher level actually. That's probably because in the first measurement period, they were acting a little bit differently than they would normally do because they knew they were being watched. If just a GPS is installed in your car, you might think, okay, someone's watching me, let's act appropriately, but they forgot about it later on. This is the dotted line. I said straight line, right? The dotted line is the control group. So it seems that the control group is speeding more over time, but that's probably because initially they acted appropriately because they were aware of being watched. Let's now look at the experimental group, the straight line. You see that they reduced their speeding during the intervention period. So when they could earn money, they speeded less. When we removed the incentive, they behaved actually the same as the control group. So people act upon the incentive when they can receive the money, but they do exactly like they did before as soon as the incentive is removed. And yeah, so there's no long-term behavior change. They don't act inappropriately because they think it's the right thing to do. They do so because they can earn money. And that's also what follow-up studies showed. These young people like speeding a lot, and they're willing to give it up if they can earn some money. But as soon as there's no money involved anymore, they do what they like again, speed. Another example of emphasizing financial gains. And then again, a question to you. We wanted to see whether we can promote encourage people to check their tire pressure. If your tires are properly inflated, you save gasoline. If you save gasoline, you save money, but you also emit less CO2. And we wanted to know what would motivate drivers most to check their tire pressure. Should we emphasize that it's good for the environment? Should we emphasize that they can earn money by doing so, or control condition, no argument, to have a reference point? So please take a moment to think what you think is the best strategy to encourage people to check their tire pressure. Now, I have to ask this in many audiences as well. We also ask respondents themselves what would be the most effective strategy. And when you ask people, they say, yes, the financial appeal is most effective. We tested this at an actual gas station as well. In the US, Virginia, we put sandwich boards where we put these flyers, and we tallied how many of these flyers were taken by respondents. Watching people out of sight. And what we found is that the monetary appeal is the least effective. The most effective one is the environmental appeal. And most people think, whatever audience I talk to, also psychologists, but also people themselves, policymakers, whatever, the majority always thinks money works best. So how come? Why didn't this appeal work that well? Now, first of all, if you emphasize the financial benefits, in this case, people start considering what are the benefits and what can you earn by checking your tire pressure, a few euros a year or so. And then people think it's not worth the effort. And that's what we found in a follow-up study. We asked for 6 types of eco-driving behaviors. To what extent people find these behaviors worth the effort. In one condition, we emphasized how much money it would save. In the other condition, we emphasized how much CO2 emissions would reduce. And people find the exact same behavior more worth the effort when we emphasize the environmental benefits compared to the financial benefits. So people just don't think it's worth the effort. Why do they think doing something for the environment is worth the effort? That is probably, and that's what we found in follow-up studies, because it feels good to act sustainably, to act on climate change, to act pro-environmentally. So now I'm confused by my own order of slides. This is the one I wanted to show you before, of course. Sorry, I mix it up. But I'll briefly explain. This is from the same European survey. We asked people to what extent they endorse different values. And what you clearly see here, I already briefly mentioned it, that many people in Europe, in many different countries, strongly endorse biospheric values. So many people care about the environment, even more so than they endorse egoistic values, the orange dots. So there's a broad value base in society. So people care about the environment, and if they act pro-environmentally, it makes them feel good. And that's what we find in a series of studies. The reason is that if you do something good for the environment, if you act upon climate change, you do something meaningful. You contribute to the greater good. And doing something meaningful makes us feel good. It's a very old notion, already introduced by Aristotle. He called it eudaimonia. We not only become happier because we do pleasurable things, but also maybe even more so because we do meaningful things. And doing something good for the environment is good, makes us feel good. And this is particularly the case if we chose to do so ourselves. So if it's a voluntary behavior choice, instead of that we're being forced upon. And this effect is also stronger when people care more about the environment. Doing something good for the environment feels good, reflects positively on yourself. And if you anticipate these positive feelings of acting pro-environmentally, you are more likely to do so. So this anticipated positive feeling of acting pro-environmentally can motivate pro-environmental actions. So Andreoni, an economist, proposed once that doing something good for other people elicits a warm glow. And he uses this as a metaphor. And one of my PhD students wanted to know, is this just a metaphor or can this literally be the case? So what he did, he asked people to complete a CO2 calculator. And he did so in two studies, one in our own psychology building in a lab, which is in the cellar, a horrible place, but one in the biology building, and there they have climate controlled rooms, where the temperature can be held constant. This is important for this study because what people did, they completed a CO2 calculator and then they received information on their score. And to make this score meaningful, it was not only indicated you emitted so many kilograms, but also you are much better or worse than the average student. And then he asked people to report the room temperature. So then a climate controlled room is good, right? Because then you know that everyone had exactly the same room temperature. So what do people report? In both studies, people who learned that they are relatively pro-environmental reported that the room temperature was higher than those who received the information that they're not so pro-environmental. So it seems that acting pro-environmentally literally makes you feel warmer. We also measured actual skin temperature. And there the results are less conclusive. In one study, we found an effect, but only for female respondents. But then we learned from human biologists with whom we collaborated in this study that you should never use male respondents if you want to measure these type of responses. But it's about how fast your blood vessels are responding to external stimuli, and that's much faster among female than men. So they never have male respondents. So that's, and the other study we could not replicate it. There the sample was somewhat smaller. So I'm not sure whether it's that you can actually measure it in the body temperature. or that we accidentally found it in one study and are not in the other. But the most important thing is that people perceive it to be warming, and our perceptions drive, of course, mainly our behavior, more so than objective factors. So why is this happening? Why do people feel warmer? Well, when you learn you do something pro-environmental, it gives your self-concept a boost, and this makes that you feel warmer. Now, two more things that I want to present. So about how values affect behavior, but also that there are other processes also driving our behavior, namely what we see ourselves doing, and in the next slide, what you think others are doing. Let's start with what we experience from our own behavior. So what we find is that stronger biospheric values increase the likelihood that you see yourself as a pro-environmental person, environmental self-identity, we call it. And if you have this identity, you're motivated to act accordingly, because we are motivated to be consistent. We don't feel comfortable doing things that are not in line with how we view ourselves. But this environmental identity is also influenced by our past behavior. So if you realize you acted pro-environmentally in the past, you're also more likely to see yourself as a pro-environmental person and act more sustainable in the future. The other way around is also the case. So if you realize, oh, I didn't act pro-environmentally that much, then you're more likely to see yourself as someone who doesn't do this type of things, which might inhibit future pro-environmental actions. And for a long time, many campaigns, at least in the Netherlands, we're emphasizing the many things that people don't do. Emphasizing, oh, you do badly, your behavior should change. And from this perspective, it would be more important to emphasize the good things that people do. And that's actually what the Dutch government recently did. Ellen van der Werf, who conducted this research, advised them in this campaign. The campaign reads, everyone does something. Iedereen doet wat in Dutch. Everyone does something. Emphasizing many people contribute to a better environment, which could boost the self-concept. But also what you think others do or find important might drive our behavior. And I give you two examples, and then we can have the discussion. One of them is corporate environmental sustainability. That is something that you see all around you, that many organizations claim to be very caring about the environment, have the mission to reduce their environmental impact, and introduce all kinds of policies to actually achieve this. And we wanted to know, does this promote pro-environmental behavior at work among employees, next to the values that people themselves have? And that's indeed the case. Well, first we find that employees with strong biospheric values are more likely to act pro-environmentally, demonstrating, like what I indicated above, that values not only drive your behavior in the private sphere, but also in other contexts at work. We also found that people act more pro-environmentally when they think their organization is committed to corporate environmental responsibility. So if your company endorses these type of values, you're also more likely to act pro-environmentally. And the interesting thing is that this corporate environmental sustainability particularly encourages sustainable behavior when employees do not strongly endorse biospheric values. So when they not strongly care themselves. And that's interesting because it means that this can motivate the less motivated. So if companies explicate that they care about the environment, that they introduce policies to reduce their environmental impact, they can motivate the less motivated people in their company. And we recently replicated this for companies' customers. So if you think that the company of whom you are a customer is more pro-environmental, you're also more likely to act pro-environmentally. And also if you think the government strongly endorses environmental goals, you are also more likely to act pro-environmentally. So the perception of the values of companies, governments matter as well. And that's also what we recently find, that when you think that other people value the environment, you're more likely to act pro-environmentally. But unfortunately, we underestimate the extent to which others care. So we tend to think that we care more about the environment than the other people do. We overestimate, but we underestimate what others find important. So it would be important to communicate more that organizations, other people in society, and the government cares. I think one of the reasons, but this is the hypothesis, why people underestimate it is because in the media you see a lot of emphasis on the many people that don't care and not so much the good news. Well, the final, that behavior of others matters. It's a different set of studies where we wanted to see, are people more likely to act appropriately if they see that other people act appropriately as well. So what happens here, city center of the city of Groningen, where I live, there is a flyer put on people's handlebar of their bicycle at a very uncomfortable place, so people had to do something with it. And we wanted to know, would they litter the flyer or not? And would this depend on whether you see that other people act appropriately in a different way? So it's not that copying the behavior, it's another type of inappropriate behavior. In this case, graffiti on the wall. Would you litter a flyer more if you see graffiti on the wall or not? Well, it does matter. The amount of people littering almost doubles. So if you see other people don't care, you're less likely to be careful yourself and to act appropriately yourself. Fortunately, this is also working the other way around. So if you see that other people do care, you are more likely to care as well. So it, again, demonstrating that other people do the appropriate thing is important to promote widespread spread appropriate action. So let me explain what's happening in this experiment. These are all former PhD students on the picture. So a girl is fiddling with a bicycle and accidentally drops oranges on the sidewalk at the moment where the respondents in this study is walking by. And what we do here is watching whether this person is being helped, whether someone is picking up the oranges. And we made sure that it was clear that the person needs some help because her bicycle is in between the oranges and where she's standing, right? So what happens before the participants in this scene enters here? So either nothing happened, control condition, or before she enters the scene at this point, she passes a person who drops a soda can and picks it up again. And that person is just signaling, I care. I don't litter. I pick up litter that I accidentally drop. And the other conditions, that's what you see on this picture, is someone is sweeping the sidewalk, cleaning up litter produced by other people, clearly showing I care. And this is not an employee of the municipality cleaning up the sidewalk. It's supposedly someone who lives there. Does it matter? It does. In a clean environment, 40% of the people helps picking up the oranges. When you pass a person who picks up a soda can, it's 64%. And when you pass a person who removes litter produced by others, it's 82%. So again, a doubling. So conclusion, multiple motivations affect sustainable behavior. We're not only driven by self-interest, we also care about the interests of others or environmental quality. Intrinsic motive, we are intrinsically motivated to act pro-environmentally, and this intrinsic motivation is a solid base for consistent sustainable behavior, because if you're intrinsically motivated, you're likely to do it over and again. While extrinsic motivation is only driving behavior as long as the incentive is there. But it is important to create a context that activates and supports biospheric values and offers co-benefits. There's one more thing I want to say about it. One reason why people might not act upon their intrinsic motivation is because it is very difficult or unattractive for them to do so. So in these cases, you need to remove the barriers as well. Thank you. Oh, I always end up with a slide showing people in the group because I'm not presenting my own work, of course. I'm presenting the work of a group of people. This is our current group, and it's very inspiring to work with them because they do very nice studies. Thanks.